Sorry. So yeah, location is where something is, and generally we use it as relative location. You know, it's in relation to something else. What about place? Anybody remember place? That's tricky because it doesn't actually sound like anything. Yeah,
Where the animals live, like in your area, like space, like place kind of thing.
I feel you. You're kind of on the right track there. It describes.
Animals on the next slide, so I'm just like maybe that might
Maybe
have
that's
a
it.
little bit here.
Now that actually, I'll show you the context of that in a second. Now, place is describing some place, describing what it's like there. So, for instance, you're talking about animals there. You're probably thinking maybe climate, what the weather is like, what's the physical features of the land. You know, what is it like if I was describing this place? That's what place is. So I tend to see those as similar, and I tend to lump them together, as you'll see. And of course, the picture you're talking about with animals is this one right here, right? And how many guys, like, when you thought, like, Africa, this is kind of what you're thinking? A little bit, maybe half a cup?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, I've never been to Africa. I've never been there before. So, as far as I was concerned, before I was really studying, I was like, it's basically the Lion King all the time, right? There's lions and tigers.
And bears. Oh, nice.
Actually, to my knowledge, there's no bears in Africa. Although there are honey badgers. And that's a thing.
I'm just trying to be like this.
Wizard, well, yeah. I just had to kill your joke because I have no sense of humor.
No, okay, so interesting factoid. So I went to the state fair, and what?
It's the third time I've heard you say that word. Continue, please.
Interesting factoid.
Factually, yes. Continue. Stay fair. Go on.
The factoid is a good word. I think.
Second time you said that. Continue on.
Okay. So, I went to the state fair, and they were giving out bunnies, and we got a bunny. And they said that all the bunnies that don't get
Picked.
what?
Picked. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, picked. Go to the lions and tigers.
I think that would actually do anything for them, though, to be honest. I mean, think about how big a tiger is and how little a bunny is. That's like, like a handful of chips.
Yeah, he's a snake. Some bunnies are big.
That's true.
I saw a bunny like this big.
That's true. Some bunnies are big, but
Some bunnies are very jumpy, so
yeah.
they might just like jump around so they don't get eaten.
Yeah, I didn't want to see a rabbit chase off a snake, so that's the thing. But I don't know. I think that's just stuff they say. I mean, maybe it's true, but I don't know. Bunnies are delicious, so there's that. True story.
I have a bunny right now, and you're making me feel.
And he's probably delicious. That doesn't mean you have to eat
See
him.
a picture of this beautiful bunny? I will show you a picture of this beautiful
That's
bunny.
you think is you're worried about this, but I have no soul. So this is like this. You're talking to the guy who wants to serve rabbit stew on Easter, because I think that would be hilarious. And apparently there's some other people here too. Oh, there's a rabbit outside. I just figured put him in a pot, right?
That is not okay.
It's a thing.
It really isn't.
Well, the thing you have to understand about all animals is all animals are meat. So, if it exists, someone has eaten it.
Look at that beautiful bunny.
Look at that giraffe. There's two of them. What up?
Would you eat a giraffe? No.
I probably would, given the chance.
Well, you wouldn't be saying that in front of Lizzie. If Lizzie was right here, right now,
I
she
know
would
that-
go all out.
I know there's a joke about eating something long neck. I don't
She's trying to be a
know.
vegan right now, so it's very. She would be like, no.
I raise my own chickens.
You do?
Yes,
And you eat them?
that's the plan.
Don't you just eat the eggs instead?
Do that too, because chickens eventually stop laying eggs, and when they do, they go in a pot. Just the look is hilarious. Yeah,
You would kill an innocent animal. If you
Yes.
have other food to eat.
Well, it's not gonna last very long, but it'll last for like years.
Well, depends on the breed. They can last up to 12, but they stop laying around 6. The thing you have to understand about meat is that all meat comes from animals. And this is actually, kind of an interesting talking point for Africa because our society is specialized, you know. If you think about the number of people in the United States who are farmers, right? Farmers represent less than 2% of the population, yet they produce enough food for 100% of the population with leftover, right? So if you go back 100 years ago, the majority of people in the United States are farmers, right? And so this whole cycle of life and death associated with the farm, raising animals from babies to the point of the slaughter, is just a reality of life. If you talk to your great-grandparents about, cooking Sunday dinner, a lot of the times it was, well, yeah, you had to cut the chicken's head off and it runs around the yard and you got to take care of things like that. But because we're specialized, we're removed from this cycle of death and rebirth. So if you think about it, this whole idea of going and buying meat from a supermarket kind of inoculates people from the process. They don't really realize what's going on with that. I remember saying, it's a kind of an infamous internet thing, is why do hunters have to go out and shoot innocent deer when they can just go buy meat from the supermarket where no animals are harmed? Just think about that for a second. Unless it's lab grown, which, how many guys are like, I'm going to eat a lab grown steak? Maybe. I mean, it depends on how it tastes. But for the most part, it's a cycle removed. Africa, on the other hand, large percentage of people in agriculture. That's just a day-to-day life. In fact, one of the stories, I don't know if Mr. Household had told you this one, but there was a group of Pres students with him, and in kind of honor of their trip, this village gave them a goat, right? And for dinner that night, they're eating. It's like, what kind of cow meat is this? What kind of is this hamburger or something like that? And the guys are, it's goat. Ding 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 ding. So.
Okay, just like seeing. I eat chicken, but I don't want to eat something other things. But I cannot look. I do not like to watch the process or something like that. How can you watch the process and not just get disgusted?
Well, that's interesting perspective because I think there's a lot of people who can't handle that. And I suppose that's a lot of personal choices. To me, though, the thing is if you actually study the meat industry in the United States, the life that your average meat bird has in the U.S. isn't really great. They basically are kept in cages until they die. And all of my chickens, they get to roam around and be chickens and have a grand old life. So, it's going to happen. I have 5 now. I actually lost one of them over the weekend. I'm not really sure what happened to it.
Oh, so are you going to eat it?
Well, no, I think a hawk did that for me. Most likely. There are predators that will, take animals like that. Or raccoons. Raccoons are vicious, actually.
I know, I saw it.
Yeah. There was one in our, part of our roof.
Elves. Do you remember elves when the raccoon attacked?
Yeah, raccoons will actually, even if you have chickens in a cage, they'll actually grab them through the cage and pull them through the cage.
Oh, but the chickens are
They
big
rip
and
chunks out of them until they get them all out.
What?
They pull a handful of flesh through and just disintegrate the chicken. It's a pretty brutal, visceral thing. The thing is, if you look at nature is not nice. Nature is full of really awful things. That's one of the things that I didn't actually get to warn you guys about with Pole to Pole when they had the little tiny antelope running away and it got eaten by wolves.
Mm-hmm.
Is generally speaking, if it's young, cute, it's going to get eaten.
Mm-hmm.
That's generally the rule of thumb when it comes to nature shows. Anyways, let's also talk Africans for a second. Let me guys think someone like this.
I like his necklace.
Sure. Again, this might be because our exposure is actually fairly limited. I mean, if you think about it, this has provided most of our understanding of Africa, for basically 20 years. Even today, they've got the new Lion King. It's the Lion Guard on Disney Channel. That's sort of kind of reinforcing a lot of these things. And I will tell you this, the Lion King is masterfully done. There's a lot of hidden puns in Swahili. For instance, you guys know Rafiki? His name in Swahili means friend. He's a friend. 'cause that's what he is. But one of the ones I think is actually kind of hilarious is, I don't know if you guys remember the scene where he's sitting there bouncing on the tree branch when Simba's adult and he's trying to like, oh, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And he's singing that Asante song, the Squash Banana, you kind of doing that whole song thing. And Simba's like, what does that even mean? Anyways, it says, it means you are a baboon and I am not. That's because that's what that means in Swahili. He's speaking Swahili, he's saying, you are a baboon and I am not. It's just a weird little joke. Anyways, there's all kinds of things like
I
that.
thought Lion King when it came to Louisville.
Yeah, I can
Brilliant musical.
So cool. Because all the little props that they have
Yeah.
to do all that stuff is so cool. Like the little thing where they keep their head and they go, but
Yeah. I once heard it described as disgustingly creative by another thing. But it's brilliant. For sure.
did you see it?
I saw it probably 10 years ago. Something like that. Anywho, this is, of course, the continent of Africa. And geographically speaking, what's going on here? What do we see here? What's up with all the green, the brown? What am I seeing? What am I looking at? Yeah.
Keep talking, I'm sorry. Grassy deserts.
Sure. Well, actually, let's talk about those two areas. What desert is there up here? Yeah, it is. And you pronounced it correctly. All
So
Sahara.
I got a gold star?
I don't have any stars. I may have a scratch and sniff. You know, stickers, scratches, stickers, smell like stuff. Scratch it.
Hey, man. Just go with it. Hey, man.
All Sahara. So it's a desert, as I'm sure you can imagine. It's actually the largest desert in the world. And you guys know what the name Al Sahara means? It's in Arabic.
All of that area?
It means desert.
Oh.
So you say
Straight out desert.
the Sahara Desert, it's the desert.
So,
Copy. That's what's there. The funny thing is, if you look at a lot of place names, the names we use of places, they often describe what's there to hilarious details. For instance, think United States for a second. Places you don't want to go. Death Valley. I wonder what happens there. Maybe it's filled with puppies and kittens.
I like it.
There you go there. It's like, I thought this was terrible. This is awesome.
Death Valley.
Death Valley.
Death.
Huh? Yeah, it's filled with death. Yeah, sure. One of my favorite deserts, because I have a favorite desert because, geek. In the middle of Asia is the Taklamakan Desert, which basically translates from Turkish into the place where you go and don't come out again. In other words, place of death. You don't go there because it's really freaking dry, right? There's nothing there. Yeah.
So there's this thing, I forget what it's called, where like you get sucked into a,
Bermuda Triangle?
yeah, that. What is that? Like, what does it do?
Nothing really. There's no scientific evidence of it being anything other than just a big expanse of stuff. The thing you have to understand is the ocean's a really big place, right? And it's pretty easy to get lost different places. And like, let's say a plane just disappears out in the middle of the Pacific, right? Where did it go? We have no way of telling unless we find the wreckage. And the thing is, the ocean is constantly in movement, not only on the surface, because you think of the ocean moving, you're probably thinking waves, and that's true, but also of currents that are underneath the surface of the water. Think like the East Australian Current, or EAC from Finding Nemo. Those are all over the ocean. So stuff that goes in the ocean just goes all over the place, just disperses, you're never going to see it again, right? In fact, weirdly enough, in the middle of the Pacific, there is actually sort of a graveyard of such, of plastic bottles, plastic trash that's been thrown in the ocean over the years. And because the currents, it all kind of conglomerated into one big bowl. So, stuff like that does happen. So the whole idea of the, Bermuda Triangle is probably something along those lines, as opposed to anything else. But the whole idea that, like, there's magnetic problems, things like that, there's no real evidence of that. People fly over it all the time. There's no problems. And the reason people tend to, like, focus on, like, that's what the issue is, or something, like, magical there or whatever, is because whenever something does happen there, it reaffirms people's belief that that's what's going on. But if you have 100 other airplanes go through and nothing happens, they don't let that discount it. So it's kind of a weird method. So grasslands, as you pointed out. Now, interestingly enough, these bands right here and right here, if you open up a map, right? Which
we're going to do real quick over here, and you look at it,
Those are such good maps.
they're kind of a pain, but they're kind of useful. That's actually going to show that particularly well. I maybe roll a little bit. All right. So, right here and right here, more or less, around 30 degrees and 30 degrees. The tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, right? So have you ever said, like, it's a tropical climate? You know what I'm talking about? Tropical, like, I think of tropical deserts. There's guys playing drums and there's coconuts and things like that, right? Tropical, right? It's because it has between the two tropics. It's that area. That's the type of climate we have there. Now, if you can imagine the sun being like a flashlight, right? And flashing on the ball, that is the Earth. And as you know, as the Earth is orbiting the sun, you have the sunlight flashing at different points on the Earth. And basically, it kind of rises north a little bit, goes south a little bit. So it's kind of doing this thing. But it never passes 33 degrees, 0.3 degrees, north and the same at the south. It never goes past the tropics. So this area here, this band across the kind of center of the Earth, is more or less receiving direct sunlight 24 hours a day. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't have nights, obviously it does, because of the rotation of the Earth. What it does mean is that the seasons that the rest of the world experiences don't really happen here. So there's no winter, there's no summer, none of that. We only have two seasons, the wet season and the dry season. And so if you think about, Africa and the grasslands as you're pointing out, during the wet season, it's green. It's just green as green can be, right? And that's like along the Serengeti Plain around here and places like that. But then you also have tropical rainforests, right? And during the dry season, during the grassland, it pretty much all disappears and becomes almost like deserts. And there's still grass there, but it's greatly reduced. In the tropical rainforest, you still have this moisture and you have a tremendous amount of life. In fact, there's more life in rainforests than anywhere else on the Earth except the ocean. You guys know what the number one type of life in the world is? What kind of animals are on more than anything else? Insects. So weirdly enough, when we talk about the best way of eating food that has the least amount of impact on the Earth, bugs are the way to go. In fact, many cultures eat insects because they're very high in protein. They're abundant, they're easy to grow.
I've heard that.
Sure. I mean, there's all kinds of other problems with it. I mean, heck, if you think about it, some types of bugs are considered delicacies. You guys, of course, know lobster. It's essentially a cockroach. It's an underwater cockroach. True story. So let's talk a couple other special features and we'll move on. Down here to the southwest, right on in here, you have a system of folds in the Earth, parallel mountains that are called cordilleras. And specifically, this area is known as the Great Rift Valley. Due to tectonic movement of the tectonic plates in the Earth's crust, you have this sort of folding of the land. And then, of course, up here, we have the longest river in the world. What's that?
The Nile.
It is the Nile. It's not just a river, it's actually. But one thing that's kind of interesting, you guys ever study ancient Egypt in school? Like ancient Egyptian pharaohs and the pyramids and all that kind of stuff. Well, so you're living here in the Nile, okay, right? And then if you look at the rest of the Sahara, it's just freaking desert, right? Now, that doesn't mean people don't live there, but they can't, like, form cities. Right? They have to live a nomadic lifestyle, move from place to place, yes.
Desert is spelled D-E-S-E-R-T.
Correct,
Huh?
yes.
Because that confused me.
It's all good.
It's
Don't worry about
desert and desert
Right.
sounds.
Here's the thing is, I never count for spelling, so don't worry about it. I don't care. We're doing a lot of funny place names like Sahara and all these different things. So, you can't really have cities, but around the Nile you can, because the amount of moisture the alluvial soil makes a very rich area to farm. I mean, it's this big green band in the middle of the desert. That's what made civilization possible. Now, how big is Africa really? Well, if we take the other continents of the world, the other countries of the world, I mean to say, kind of mash them in there real good, you can see how it kind of fits. The United States is just a small chunk of it. You have room for the U.S., Africa, India, more of China, the United Kingdom, Eastern Europe, Italy, Germany, France, and Spain. So basically, most of Europe plus the U.S. plus part of Asia combined. It's a huge place, yeah.
And I see that in Africa especially, grasshoppers, mopane caterpillars, you lines and chitty grubs, termites, African palm weevil, stink bugs, mealworms.
Mealworms are huge all over the world, yeah. All right, so here's the actual first bit of actual notes here. And you'll notice I have 3 sentences, okay? Now, one thing I want to point out to you, not every word up here is necessary. For instance, you might render the third bullet as Africa is plateau, arrow over 1,000 feet. Something like that. If you want to go ahead and write down the full sentence, be my guest. But I'm just saying there are ways to rearrange things that might make sense to you to help save you some writing. By all means, feel free to do that. So as mentioned in bullet number 1, most of Africa is a plateau. So that means it's a pretty high area, but mostly flat. It's over 1,000 feet above sea level, which can influence a lot of different things, from climate to the culture that develops there. Furthermore, there's a lot of different basins, essentially depressions in the plateau that collect rainwater like a giant funnel and feed these into rivers. In fact, the Nile stretches for most of the African climate all the way down here, but there's various branches of the Nile. There's the Red Nile, the Green Nile, the Blue Nile, the White Nile, all these different colors of Nile, as well as just the Nile. And what's interesting is maybe 8 years ago, IMAX had a series that was Journey Through the Nile, where these guys got in canoes and paddled all the way from Mozambique to Egypt. And like, it's pretty weird. There's like parts where they were going through and they ran across some raiders, some Bedouins who like shot at them with rifles from the banks of the basins and things like that. So it was kind of a wild journey. In fact, it's pretty weird. It's almost like Star Wars going to Tatooine with Tusken Raiders. In fact, those were inspired by Bedouins. And so that whole mentality. Anyway, so, you know, all these different things going on. And then, of course, the Nile has been a lifeline for Egypt and many other countries that flows through for centuries. If you think about it, there's really a number of things necessary to have civilization. And the first is farms. How do you guys know what a hunter-gatherer is? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? What does a hunter-gatherer do?
Where it likes cards,
Sure. Well, kind of. Produce is a bit strong because we're talking about the birth of agriculture. Let me ask you this question. Have you guys ever played Minecraft?
Yep.
Okay. So you spawn a new world Minecraft, right? What's the first thing you do?
Collect stuff.
Right, you go punch a tree, right? You punch a tree and get wood,
I
right?
don't want to know.
Well, that's okay. You can listen to the story and you'll feel like you're part of this.
Minecraft is not my forte.
That's all right. It's okay. It's okay. So here's the thing: is if you're like me and you start off a new world, you start collecting all this stuff, and then you find some animals. Of course, you need food. So what do? You bludgeon them to death with an axe or whatever else you happen to have in your hand, or even punch them to death, right? And you get that delicious, delicious meat. And then you go find some coal. You dig yourself a hole to cry in while the monsters come out, and you cook your meat, and you're good, right? That's a hunter-gatherer. You just run around, you hunt animals that you find, gather any food you might come across, and essentially that's what you're living on. But as you progress in Minecraft, eventually either because you just kill all the animals around you and they're not spawning anymore, or you're going to think you run out of stuff. So you've got to start actively making your own food. So by cutting through grass, things like that, you find seeds, you plant that, you start growing weeds, Maybe you find some stuff in a chest, start growing carrots, things like that. You create like yourself a little farm, right? But then, if you want more meat and tools, things like that, you can go find animals using, bait and things like that. You can trap them and move them into an enclosed area near your house, and start breeding, the animals so you have a steady supply. That's the birth of agriculture. It's settling down in one place, and that way you have easy access to food, right? Now let's do this on a larger scale. Let's say that you were playing on a Minecraft server with 1,000 people on it, right? There are certain climates that are going to be better suited for farming, even in Minecraft. You can't, if you spawn in the middle of the desert, you're not doing any farming. You spawn in the jungle, you can, but it's harder, right? So the areas of grasslands that are the best for farming, that's where everybody's going to go, right? Because they'll all congregate in your one area. And you can just imagine the shenanigans of 1,000 people on the internet trying to all settle in one area. I mean, you're going to have griefers burning each other's houses down, you're going to have players killing other players, all those kind of shenanigans, right? So maybe all the players decide, look, we need to create some server rules for these people so that this stuff doesn't happen. So they create some rules. You cannot steal from other people, you cannot kill other players, you cannot burn their products down, stuff like that. And if you do, we ban you. Okay? You with me so far? Okay? Let's apply to the real world now. What have we just created? We've created laws. We've created civilization. We've created maybe a leader who is kind of organizing all this, yeah? This is how civilizations develop. As people kind of come together, they start competing over resources, which often means killing each other. So somebody has to put a stop to this, and they do, and they create a civilization in the process. This is how Egypt began. This is how Rome began. All these great civilizations began first as just a group of hunter-gatherers settled in areas that were natural for farming. It just so happens that in Egypt, that's the Nile. Okay? Now, if you take it one step farther, if you come over to here, over into modern-day Iraq, oh, excuse me. Yeah, over at Iraq. I was going to say Iran. No, it's Israel. You have these two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. You combine those into this area, it makes a sort of crescent shape, which is often why it's called the Fertile Crescent. So,
are we gonna have to know those things
not yet.
on our map test when we have that?
Yeah, that is the areas I just described earlier here. That's not Africa. But I was just making a point, because basically what's going to happen when we get to Asia, yeah, you will. So you're just going to hear it now and you're going to hear it later. So sorry. All right, everyone got these 3 bullets? Hold on. Hold on to what? My stick?
Yes. Baseball player.
Hmm?
Baseball player.
That was really more Jedi Knight, which, I could do. This is actually a kendo stance. It's a sword fighting style from Japan. And is, makes sense because actually, if you look at a lot of lightsaber fighting, it was based on kendo. But,
Oh, your stick wherever you're thinking, just like, your stick can just make my eyes follow it. Okay.
but in Western style fencing from Europe, with that style of sword, there's 4 different positions. There's this one, this one, this one, and this one. That's Western fencing. It's the type of fencing like knights did. With that's a specifically German longsword fighting, the style of Ringgeg from the Legenschwert.
I have a riddle on knights.
Here's 3 more. I don't really get to talk to you guys too much about the style of fencing because we're not covering Europe, but the style of sword really heavily dictated how people fought with them. Since we're about to run out of time, I'm going to talk to you guys briefly about it. You guys can get those bullets. But for most of history, this was actually the most common weapon used by armies. This is a spear head. You can imagine this put on a stick, so it's about yay tall. That basically gives you reach. So, you know, you can imagine a big stick, and you can get somebody and still remain protected. So spears are actually pretty effective weapons. The reason people went to something like this instead is because they could use it to hairless. What's that?
I feel like one of them would be used to kill animals more than the other.
Well, if you think about it, all these are weapons. They're tools to kill them. That's what they do. People would hunt with a spear, not with a sword. Although there were hunting swords, they were really hunting swords were really more around in the age of guns, because whenever you shoot an animal, you don't necessarily kill it. And so you have to dispatch it, so you do it with a hunting sword. But that's a whole other thing. No, just cross it out, it's fine. I'm kind of anti-whiteout because I think it just looks hideous. Anyways, so the east of Africa, which generally speaking we're going to divide it north, south, east, and west. The Great Rift Valley, which I talked to you guys a minute ago, that's kind of towards the south and east around Mozambique. That's its main area formed by continental Europe. Furthermore, as far as other landforms, it had one of the tallest mountain, I'm going to say, in Africa is Mount Kilimanjaro, which is between Kenya and Tanzania. And lastly, one of the things you have to understand, when it comes with tectonic activity, it comes with raw materials, particularly minerals. Most of the diamonds in the world are actually come from Africa, as well as a significant amount of gold. You also have all kinds of other minerals that you wouldn't necessarily think of, like tungsten, things that are imperative for creating a modern society. Because the thing you have to understand is metallurgy, and metals in general, we kind of take for granted, it's kind of in everything, it is actually kind of advanced chemistry. Again, take steel, for instance. You guys probably know steel is hard, right? It has to be for it to hold an edge. You know, if it doesn't have a hard caliber to it, if it's not hard metal, you can't actually grind this to an edge, because if you hit something with it, it just warps and bends. But at the same token, the harder you make something, the more brittle it becomes. So if you think about hitting something that's hard with another hard thing, it cracks, it shatters, right? It doesn't bend and move with it. Steel has to be both. What it is this iron with a matrix of carbon, and you heat treat it in such a way that the edges are hard so they can hold edge, but at the same time, flexible.
Can you see it, or no? Is that not
What's that? I won't hand it off because it is a weapon. It's actually real.
I'm going to try to hurt
But-
either of them, but...
Well, it's not so much that, it's like hurting yourself. But what's the question on that? You're just curious about like its weight and things like that? It weighs about a pound, give or take. That's one thing I think is really hilarious when people describe, like, you know, fantasy, you know, 10-pound swords, like that would be preposterous. It's actually not sharp at all. It was never sharpened. It wasn't made to be. It was actually a practice blade for a number of years. You can actually see where I made mistakes. There's dings in it. That's a no-no. That comes from hitting another sword edge on edge, which you should never do, because it actually can shatter your sword. Instead, with this type of sword, it'd be paired with a shield. In the fighting style, there's a couple different stances. This is one. This is better. And it seems really stupid because you get your sword out of the way, but there's a reason for it back here. If I put my shield up, you can't actually see the blade. So if I come over the top or something like that, you can't see it. But the other thing is it keeps it in such a way that I can use my shield as like a weapon. So I can use my shield to divide your shield out the way and then come into a gut shot, something like that. Now, sword play, of course, evolved
It's a
over the years.
big knife, a big sword for
Hmm?
a person.
What's that?
That's a big sword. For a person.
It's actually short.
I've seen a bigger one.
let's say the Lebensschwert, the long sword, is about yay,
Yeah.
and had a longer handle. And the reason for that, this sword was built as sword and shield, but this is an early sword. The thing is, though, as swordplay evolved, people would start using a two-handed sword grip, and it could get you different attacks. For instance, in the Lebensschwert style, the idea is basically good offense is your defense. So, for instance, if someone's like coming with a straight chop at you, the suggestion is to sidestep the blow and at the same time cut their hands off. So, kind of Jedi, a little bit. But the other thing is that this blade isn't the only part of the sword. For instance, let's say somebody's decked out in armor like that, right? I can't stab through that. Despite what movies might tell you, there's no stabbing through metal like that. It just can't happen. So instead, what you'd see knights do, this looks really stupid, I'll tell you that right now, but they do this. It's called hand sorting it. That doesn't sound right, but basically the idea is you grab it and you turn this into a war hammer. So I can clock someone up the noodle with the pommel. If I have a good enough aim, I can actually jam this into their helmet in the eye socket, put their eye out. Or if I come down on top and they try to block my sword like so, I can use this to hook it and jab them in the face. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do. The other thing is by half swording, that's the term. Like so, I've effectively shortened my grip so this becomes more maneuverable. So it almost fencing becomes part of like wrestling. So the thing you have to understand about fencing compared to sport fencing, which I also have done. Fencing is a sport where you're trying to touch the other person and get a point. Fencing with an actual sword fighting is about killing an opponent with a sword. So it tends to be a lot more brutal and a lot more involved than people are necessarily used to. So knights knew what they were doing. It took a lot of training to be able to do it. And swords, of course, evolved over the
They knew
years.
what they were doing if they were doing that.
Oh, sure.
How soon like you knew you would do.
Oh, I do. I used to actually do, I still do sword fencing. I'll show you the rest later. But no, there's groups like ARMA, the Association for Renaissance Martial Arts, that still study this stuff.